and welcome to the National World War II Museum's podcast series, Service on Celluloid. Each week, our in-house experts sit down with special guests to discuss depictions of World War II on film. Sit back and get ready for a lively debate that will reveal the good and bad of how Hollywood shows the 20th century's most dramatic event. My name is Seth Paradin, historian and digital content manager here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. As always, we're sitting down with
Dr. Christelle Lefoucheur, research historian at the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy here at the museum.
And today our special guests for this episode are Dr. Jason Dawsey, Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency Special Projects Historian.
Great to be here.
Thanks for being here, Jason. And last but certainly not least, Miss Amber Mitchell, Historian and Community Program Coordinator here at the museum.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Today we will be discussing Steven Spielberg's 1993 film Schindler's List. The film follows Oskar Schindler, a German businessman and Nazi Party member who initially takes advantage of the situation surrounding Poland's Jewish population. Schindler employs Jewish workers in his factory for financial gain and in turn becomes a war profiteer, engaging in the black market and befriending high-level members of the SS, all to his advantage. As Schindler sees the treatment of the Jews firsthand, his opinions change and he begins to employ the Jews in order to save them from further persecution and death. Eventually, he saved more than 1,000 Jews during the Holocaust. Schindler's List stars Liam Neeson as Schindler, Ralph Fiennes as SS officer Amon Göth, and Ben Kingsley as Itzhak Stern, Schindler's Jewish accountant and frequent advisor. The film was nominated for 12 Academy Awards, winning 7, including Best Director and Best Picture. It was an enormous commercial and critical success and is generally regarded as one of the finest films ever made, ranking 8th on AFI's Top 100 Movies of All Time. So I guess to start this discussion, I'm going to ask the question that we're always here to answer, and that is, how accurate is Schindler's List? Jason?
That's a tough one, I think, just to start out with, only because there's so many facets of the film you have to really encompass with that. So I think the first place to start is the issue of Oskar Schindler, and I think it's quite an accurate description of him. He's an ethnic German, actually from the time of Czechoslovakia, and he had been involved in taking over businesses that had once been owned by Jews or Poles, starting in the fall of 1939. And the film shows him as that kind of individual. He's a capitalist. He's interested in profit, and the whole approach we get of him in the film, at least the first half to 2/3 of it, is that he thinks about everything in terms of money and about utility and what's going to be good for him. And he relates to everyone, whether they're SS or they're Jewish workers, in terms of his self-interest and how he can appeal to their self-interest. And we obviously see him evolve through the film, but that seems to mirror the real Schindler's kind of personal evolution. And the film, I think, in that sense is quite accurate, in that you get a sense that Oskar Schindler is someone who is a pretty unorthodox hero, an unorthodox rescuer, but we see him develop into that.
In the beginning of the movie, he's rather despicable, really.
Absolutely.
He really is. I mean, he's not a likable guy. He's a womanizer. He's a hard drinker. He makes, buddies with guys in the high-ranking guys in the SS, and he uses all of that to his advantage. But he was a pretty interesting cat, though. I mean, I didn't discover until I started doing research for this, because this, admittedly, is not a movie you just go home and watch over and over and over again. That he was in the Abwehr. He was a spy for 4 years, like 35 to 39, or is it 36 to 39, something like that? Yeah. I never knew that. I mean, that's rather enlightening, really. But, yeah, he's definitely a very interesting guy. And in the beginning of the movie, you don't, at least I don't like him at all. I think he's kind of, garbage, really.
Yeah, I agree. I just really was taken aback. I was taken aback when I was sitting and watching. I'm like, God, this guy's so unlikable. Like, he treats his wife like crap when you only see her maybe 10 minutes out of the film. He has a different woman every night. But I think that's also what's somewhat appealing about his story, in that he is this terrible guy who sees something terrible happening and is like, well, I mean, I might be a bad guy, but I'm not that bad of a guy in some respects. So, there's a limit to what's doable and what's not doable for Oskar Schindler, and that's what makes his character, although trash at times, just a lot more compelling, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he is human.
Mm-hmm.
He's also very much a product of the time he lived in. His initial disregard for any Jewish, what's happening to the Jews is very clear. And I think the scene for me that's the most striking is we have a shot of this family who is packing stuff, obviously leaving the very relatively wealthy apartment they're in and trying to salvage whatever they can carry literally under their arm and in the suitcase. And then leave the apartment. There's, I don't know, some Germans, potentially SS there, I'm not quite remember. They leave the apartment and join this column of fellow, Jewish men and women that have been evicted. And then his car arrive and he just get out and just do not even glance at the column, and perfectly knowing, of course, what's happening, and just get in an apartment and walk around. And it's like, this is gonna do. This is nice. I like it here. So originally, he's really, grew up, or not grew up. Of course, he's an adult man, but he, since 1933 and probably before that, he's a member of the Nazi Party, and he has one actually witnessed several cases where he has internalized this kind of disregard for what's happening to Jewish men and women. So,
in that scene that you're talking about, there's a shot of the Jews being put into their apartment in the ghetto.
The follow-him shot, yeah.
And the patriarch says it couldn't be worse, and then it shoots right over to a shot of Schindler in that guy's luxurious apartment, and he says it couldn't be better.
Yeah, there's a few of those kind of a montage when it's the editing is paralleling to situation. Yeah. The later one, of course, was going to be Schindler and Amon when they're shaving and so on and so on. So yeah, it's quite sneaky of Spielberg.
Yeah.
But coming back to your original question, Seth, about how accurate it is. I mean, we know. Oh, if our listener do not know. The film is based on the novel, but it's really, I would call really a very detailed and thoroughly researched novel with, over 50 interviews. The author went to the archive, interviewed, people that experienced that. There was a Krakow ghetto that was liquidated, as was the term used by the Nazi. There was the working camp.
Plaszow.
Plaszow. There was Schindler. There was his company existed. So all of those, I think it's probably, if we look at the handful of Spielberg's historical movie, I think it's probably one of the most attempt to be as historically accurate as possible. And the few variation or the few things that we could say are not historically accurate is really a result of the medium of film, which you have to reduce a complexity. For example, you can't go into mentioning that he was a spy and so on, because that would really add. And the second is kind of reducing the time, the chronology, because there's so much happening. So you could really, the film is already over 3 hours, but otherwise it's as historians thumb up.
Yeah, I think maybe the better question to ask is because there's a lot of characters in this movie. There's a lot of people that are portrayed in this movie, and obviously Schindler being one, Amon Göth being another. Maybe we should say how accurate are the depictions of these people. And to your point, I would say that from what I've read about Oskar Schindler, it's a pretty accurate depiction of who he was and what kind of a person he was. Because, and I think we need to say that while in the beginning of the film he is a despicable character, he completely redeems himself, if you will, and he, he's the embodiment of the good German, quote unquote, good German, towards the end of the movie, because he sacrifices everything that he had, regardless of how he got it, to save people's lives, and that's it doesn't get any better than that.
I think too, this also is something we could come back to with a couple of these questions, but it's just interesting that Spielberg chooses him as a rescuer, and that there are obviously many figures from that period that are remembered as rescuers. Yad Vashem and Jerusalem even has this, of course, this righteous among the nations classification for people who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. And Schindler is a fascinating case of someone who was very well-to-do, and the fact that he can move, as I think both Seth and Christelle mentioned, he's hanging out with SS officers. He's partying with them. He's mentioning about contracts with the Army. And so he's a guy that has kind of impeccable bourgeois taste, the shots of the cufflinks and the neckties and the suits.
Wine, he goes through all this famous wine.
Exactly.
Do you have that?
Yeah, the wine, the champagne, the food, these lavish parties. Obviously, he's very popular with women. And that's his life, and he expects those good things, and that's really how the kind of the images we see of him in the beginning, are. And so it was interesting for Spielberg to choose him as, among all the people he could have made a film about, that he chose Schindler, and it does actually, for me, I agree, he is really completely unlikable early in the film, but he also is. He makes you curious. You kind of wonder, like, where is this going to go with him? Like, what is he going to do when his whole focus on self-interest and just relating to people about money? What's this going to get me, and what's it going to get you if we strike a deal? And he begins to collide with the reality, outside his business, which is a regime that's, in fact, more interested in killing than it is even the economic efficiency they might get from deploying Jewish laborers, and that's what he's having to kind of confront, is that this is a regime that ultimately the kind of economic logic that he really buys into, they don't fully buy into. Up to a point they might, and he has to figure out how to negotiate that. And the film it's interesting to see how Spielberg follows his own path, how Schindler's path, and dealing with that.
Following up on what Jason is saying, I wonder if we can talk a little bit about his conversion in a certain sense, or his gradual, which was in real life a little bit more gradual, change of state of mind or whatever. The only really major criticism I have on the film, which I think is an excellent film, is the scene with the little red girl in the red coat. Mm. It's for me it's typical Spielberg, and kind of bringing first of all, the scene have been debunked as probably never happened, because the way the hill is, you can really have a view of the ghetto the way it was shot in the movie. So let's just put that on the side. And then, this identification with the little red girl, and then we bring the only color in this black and white movie. It's so striking, and it's striking for, I don't know. I didn't buy that just seeing this little girl would be the one thing that's going to make you click. I assume it's not just a little girl. It's, of course, this massacre that's thoroughly enjoyed by the German, especially by Amon, and just really mass killing of Jews, of the inhabitants of the ghettos. But, yeah, I don't know what you guys thought about the scene.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to bring that up. And in the movie, that's the turning point, I think, for Schindler. That's when he sees with his own eyes the liquidation of the ghetto, and he's in the movie now, and he sees these people being murdered and slaughtered wholesale. That's when he realizes, Jesus God, these are horrible people, and I'm associating with these people, and I'm benefiting from this. In reality, that never happened. He didn't, as you said, there's no hill for him to sit up there and watch. Not that the Germans would have allowed that anyway, and that didn't occur. And as you said, you're right in that his change in reality was a lot more drawn out, I think, than it was in a movie, because in a movie it's like flipping a switch. Yeah. Which, I mean, if you see something like that, it would probably do the same thing to you, but in reality, of course, it didn't, because he didn't see that. But no, I think that scene, commenting on the scene, with the little girl in the red coat, I think that's Spielberg trying to pull at your heartstrings more than anything else, and which, I mean, you really don't need to in this movie. But that, for me in particular, is one of the hardest things to watch, because she's an innocent, she's about 3.
Yeah, she's about 4 or 5.
Yeah, and it's horrible.
Yeah, I was doing some background research myself, and the little girl who played that character in the film, Spielberg, I think, made her promise she would never watch the film until she was 21, and she watched it when she was 12 and freaked out for a little while about just what she was doing because she didn't understand. Of course, she was 5 at the time. But then she just realized just how important it was for her to embody that sort of moment, because like you both have said, it definitely would not have happened that way. But I think the little girl in the red, really symbolizes more so the struggle that many Germans who had interactions and really close relationships with Jewish people throughout history, really, and having to deal with not being able to ignore the realities of the Holocaust and what the Nazis were doing at that point anymore. And it seemed like for me, with Oskar Schindler, he obviously has a soft spot for women, but he also has a soft spot for younger girls and people who are more impressionable. You kind of see that with his interactions with Helen later in the movie, and with some of the little girls who show up at the factory. But I think having his turning point be symbolized by this little girl in red was a good choice for Spielberg to do, because it seems to embody everything that Oskar Schindler was trying to hide from himself, this little soft spot that he has, but he wasn't able to do that forever.
I'm going to jump in. There's 2 things that bothers me with that. A is that, it's as if viewers and us as human beings can only empathize with children. Like if children are armed, then we react. Which is, adult men and women, older people, we don't care that much. Sorry, I'm being very cynical right now. The second one is, I think it's almost a even bigger indictment of the passivity of German to see that only when a full-on blown massacre is organized, then there's a reaction. And we know, the massacre happened, I think, in 1943. Jews have been slowly ostracized, disappeared from the German society, were beaten in public, were killed even in public way before the massacre. There were constant murders all across the country. And then, having this one concentrate, I know it's for cinematic purposes, but having this one concentrate moment being the turnaround, he was really completely blind to what happened before. Anyway, we probably need to cut that.
No, I don't think so. And I don't think he was blind to what happened before. I think he turned a blind eye.
Yes, that's what I meant.
And that's the difference, is that he knew what the hell was going on, and he's like, I'm making money, I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I'm living my life and I'm doing my deal. But there's varying ideas of who that little girl represents. I think it's just in my opinion, I think she represents all the children of the Holocaust. I really do. And she's a beautiful little girl, and she's impeccably dressed. She's a beautiful child. And
she looked like she could be his child.
Yeah. And my little girl's 5 years old. And there is, that's an extremely hard scene to watch, and it's extremely difficult to get past, because as a father, I'm looking at that little child and I'm thinking of my baby girl, and that's hard to get through. And I can see why he did it. I can see why Spielberg put it in, because it's designed to be a punch in the gut, and for me, it is. It's hard.
What's interesting is that we don't immediately see what's happening with her. She is, sorry for the listener, she is much later, I think it's really later in the movie, when they have to exhume the corpse and burn them because the Russians are coming, which again was something that truly happened as the Russians are making their way west. The Germans, are burning records and then exhuming corpse and burning them to leave no trace of what they've been doing. And this is when we see her on the wheelbarrow being carried. For me, more emotional was really all those children trying to find hiding places. You see, they're really trying every corner, and there's no more room there. And then, of course, the following scene, we have a feeling, okay, they made it. They managed to find hiding place. They're good. But the Germans knew about that. And then in the night, they came, listened to the wall, and then killed even more. By the way, with the help of the Judenrat police, the Jewish police that was in the ghetto, which is something that is only tangentially mentioned, but I think Spielberg could have done a little bit more. I mean, there's one character that we immediately dislike, who decide to work with the police and then walking around with a big stick and getting all bribery possible. But that was also very common. Working for the Jewish council, but then really being kind of a watchdog for the German, or implementing some of the Germans' completely irrational new laws and whatever.
It's really, I think, one of the parts about the film I think that is so powerful for viewers is the fact that Spielberg doesn't spare you from seeing the killing of the most vulnerable people. An older man with one arm. You see, obviously, children. I mean, we mentioned the little girl and the case of the children in hiding. I think, to me, the most difficult part of the film is the selection that takes place, and you see the adults. In fact, the camera kind of closes in on them, and the adults are relieved. They're going to be allowed to work, and that's going to mean survival for a period of time, and you have this moment of relief, and then they look over, and then those trucks are just filled with kids, and everybody, of course, knows what that means. These are children, and they're probably going to Auschwitz immediately. And so Spielberg, he realizes that if you're going to make a film like this, you can't really spare the viewer, and even with these cases that just seem so incomprehensible, he shows it. And that massacre in the ghetto is really just incredible to watch, like them just pulling people out, left and right, and you even get you can get the shots on the street of the violence, and then you get the shot up above where you can just look down and see the entire thing, and obviously showing people who may not know that much about the Holocaust what these liquidations looked like, and I think that also is a part of the film that's quite accurate. If you're going to, how do you show something that's so monstrous and violent? And he takes you through it. He does.
It shows the cruelty of that liquidation. There's two scenes that come to mind. One is when a young boy, he looks like probably about 13, 14, he makes a break, and he runs, and he goes, and of course they catch him. And they're bringing him back in between two guys, one guy on each side of him, and German raises his K-98, and boom, he blasts him right there. And one of the guys, just kills him, 10 feet from him with a rifle. And then one of the Germans carrying him starts arguing with him about, you almost hit me. Well, Jesus, you just killed a kid. And then there's another scene where they've got a bunch of, it's kind of far away, frankly, I don't remember if it's men or women, but it doesn't matter. They're lined up back to, and they're trying to see how many they can kill with one bullet to save ammunition. And then they get like 4 or 5 of them, and then they go up with pistols and get rid of the other 2 who are standing there trembling. And it's, Jesus, it's ultimate in cruelty, and they did not care. Did not care. And I think that's depicted incredibly well. And
also, for some of the German, especially based on historical record, for Amon, the enjoyment of killing. Yeah. He was, weirdly enough, he was actually worse than the way he was depicted in the movie. There are records of him having, people being eaten alive by his own dogs, and him watching and enjoying that. And Spielberg was considering putting that in the movie, and he thought, oh, that's too much, people will not buy it and think that we just made that up. So it's really, we go to the extreme, and he was really such a psychopath.
Well, and that brings up the next character in the film that we need to talk about, and that's Amon. Yeah. And if there ever was someone who deserved an Oscar for being the worst villain in film history, it's this guy. Ralph Fiennes was scarily good as Amon, and talk about a despicable character. Let's talk about him.
Yeah, I think one thing it's just worth pointing out, like since the film has all the connections with Schindler, is that some interesting similarities between the two of them. They're both born in 1908, and Schindler is born in Moravia, present-day Czech Republic, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Goethe is from Vienna, and then it's interesting that the two of them, they don't have any past prior to the war, but they're connected via Krakow, which had been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, prior to the end of World War I. And so it's interesting the parallels between these two men and how they find themselves in this new kind of Nazi new order. And Goethe is, I think Christelle is right, like he is even more despicable as a real human being, historical human being, than he is in the depiction that Fiennes gives, as good as that is. And there's just really nothing about him that's, is redeemable, even though it's interesting that moment where Schindler tries to say that the war is made in this way. The war is made in this way.
That was a weird scene when he's like, oh, he's such a crook. He likes women and good wine. And then, of course, Stern say, and killing. But this defense of Goethe, after he had seen with his own eye what he's capable of, was very strange in the film.
I think that kind of hints at this what I was kind of getting from that scene of really Schindler coming to terms with the fact that they could have been the same person, that if only for happenstance, because they both like women, they both enjoy fine things, they both are Germans, they both come from similar backgrounds. If it wasn't for him going left and Amon going right, they could have been in the same position.
Yeah, and he was as greedy and corrupt, actually, as Schindler, too. I mean, he was arrested. Can you imagine? He was arrested by the German because he was taking too much bribery.
Yes, he was.
And doing black market and stealing money, actually, from the Nazi government by, taking some money that was supposed to pay something. So, I mean, he was actually worse than in terms of, greed. But
I think that scene, though, too, just to add to what's been said about Schindler defending him, at least early on. I think, too, though, I think Spielberg showing how, for Schindler, his own worldview was that people really did what was best for them, in terms of their kind of rational self-interest. They were kind of calculating kind of people like he was, and that someone would enjoy and relish that kind of brutality for its own sake instead of just being made to do it. And instead that you really enjoyed it, you really, was something you look forward to. And I think that was it was incomprehensible for him. And I think that's part of the kind of arc of his character is coming to realize that Goethe and this whole system was predicated on a worldview that couldn't be squared with his own, that they were not ultimately about doing, what's really in one's own calculating self-interest. There was a different kind of ideology, at least the way I read it, that was driving that. And yet in that earlier stage of the film, I think he can't really get that about Goethe yet. I think he obviously will, later on. And they have a very interesting relationship, obviously, when Schindler is accused of violating the Race and Resettlement Act for kissing this Jewish girl. And it's Goethe, in fact, who defends him to other SS men who want to prosecute Schindler for this, or certainly interested in prosecuting him. And it's Goethe who comes up and makes this kind of defense,
they were buddies. Yeah. Not only in the movie were they, but in reality, they were pals. I mean, they were drinking buddies and carousing buddies. I mean, they were buddies. I recently watched a documentary called Inheritance. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it or seen it. It's with the real-life Helen, who was Amon's house slave, for lack of a better term. And Helen Rosenzweig is her name, and it's about an interaction between her and Amon's daughter, Monica Hertwig. And Helen, Mrs. Rosenzweig says that, they used to embrace when Oskar and Amon would meet. They'd embrace and, hang out and drink and party, and they were friends. So that's where I think that defense comes from on both sides. And I don't really ever get the impression that Oskar is ever turned off by Amon. Throughout the whole movie, he gets more interested in helping those who are under his thumb, but he never cuts with Amon. He never says, I'm done with you. I got nothing to do with you, because in reality as well, too, again, coming from this documentary, Amon's daughter used to be visited by Oskar after the war. Like, just check it on her. How you doing? Oh, you look just like your father. Yeah. So, and he knew that he was a cold-blooded murderer. And that's what Amon is in the movie and was in real life. He was a psychopathic, cold-blooded murderer. And Oskar Schindler was completely aware of that.
Yeah.
Completely aware.
And there's that scene where Oskar and Amon are sitting there having a drink, and Oskar is basically trying to goad him into pardoning people, and be basically saying you can be a better person.
He relates him to being an emperor.
Right.
Yeah.
You can be blessed, taking your 2 fingers and making the sign of the cross, be pardoned. And then you get that series of scenes with, the young man dropping the saddle on the ground, and him wanting to do something, Amon wanting to do something to him, and just saying, just get out of my face instead, rather than hurting him. And then, later on, a different young man who's enslaved by him is scrubbing out his tub, and he does the whole, okay, you are pardoned instead of me beating you. But then he turns around and shoots him anyway, which I just found, I think that was just like the real moment where I'm just like, yeah, this guy is just just even more terrible than you could have ever thought, because you have this young man who's just walking away, that you've said that you've blessed, but then you blessed and pardoned, but then you turn around and shoot him anyway. That's just truly inhumane, and there's nothing that can bring you back from something like that.
I thought was very interesting in this scene and other scene is really this. I think they did a good job of showing the kind of randomness of the Nazi violence, which was done on purpose, and the goal was you never know what's going to happen. So this constant state of fear, you undernourish, you work to death, and then you never know when you're going to be beaten, or even killed for that matter. And I think him, going in the morning and just taking his gun, his rifle, and then just shooting completely randomly. I think actually that was, of course, heartbreaking, but also I think very, very accurate what was happening in the camp.
Absolutely. Helen Rosenzweig said that she used to watch him do that. He'd wake up in the morning and her room was in the room below his, and she would tremble at the sound of his footsteps, knowing, he was a big guy. So he made a distinct sound when he walked, and she said, she'd hear the rifle shots from the balcony, and it was pretty damn obvious what was going on. So, that depiction is very accurate.
I'm glad you brought up that point about, living in constant fear. There's a book by Orlando Patterson on how slavery was able to really take hold, and it's based on social death. Like, you can't subjugate an entire people without truly ripping them down to what their base level is, and that is an animal, not treating them with any kind of respect, any sense of humanity, and making sure that they are always on edge, and that they never are able to predict what you're going to do or what you're able to or willing to do to keep them in their position of total social death and isolation. So that's a great point, Christelle.
Yeah, and I think the movie, although I wish it would have been a little bit more upfront with that, I think gave us a lot of good snippet insight in how the Nazis were doing that. We mentioned earlier the scene of the expropriation. They steal apartments, everything they have, then they isolate them in the ghetto. And then there's this interesting moment where Amon is almost attracted to Helen. He's not quite clear, but he mentioned of her, are those the eyes of a rat or lice? And this is again something that was, since before 1933, you talk about Jews in those terms. You completely dehumanize them by calling them vermins. Never considered them as a human being. And that was, of course, the hierarchy that the Nazis had. Of course, Aryans on the top, Western Europeans, the Southern Europeans, and then the Slavs, and then way below, not even part of the charts. And then you had the Jews that were not even considered human. And we get a little bit of sense of that. And I think also this kind of motivational speech that Amon is giving before they liquidated the ghetto, This was 600 years of today's history. And again, this will to completely eradicate an entire people. That was pretty chilling.
An entire history, because he says, as of today, those 600 years are a rumor.
And it's interesting because he mentioned that they've done so much for arts and culture and science. So he acknowledged their contribution, and yet the ultimate goal is just to eliminate them. That was almost equally chilling as the actual killing, which is the hearing being vocalized what the complete crazy ideology of the Nazis was.
Apparently, I'd heard this years ago, and I read it just the other day, but there were a lot of survivors as extras in that movie, which I would find incredibly difficult to do, frankly.
The shooting was very difficult. They had to take numerous breaks, a lot of the extras, but also Spielberg himself. I read that he had just to down.
He was worn down. But apparently, Ralph Fiennes was so good in the role of Amon Goth. There was this in particular. There's one scene where he rides around on a white horse, and he did that. The real Amon did that. And there was a survivor. Her name was Mila Pfefferberg, who was in Plaszow during the war, and she apparently had some fairly close contact with the real Amon, quite a bit. And he used to do that quite often, ride around on a white horse and pick out somebody and boom, just kill him. And anyway, the actor was riding around on his horse, and apparently he was so utterly convincing in the role that she had a nervous breakdown at the sight of Ralph Fiennes on the back of a white horse. So that's when you know you're playing the role. That being said, we do need to move on to other topics, and one that I definitely want to get to is the depiction of the Jews in the film.
Problematic.
Yeah. And since you said that, I'll let you start. How so?
Well, the first encounters, it's all about money. The black marketer, and then it's all about Schindler, convincing through the help of Stern, getting them to bring money for him to buy the company and so on. So we don't have a lot of insights into what they're thinking or feeling, for that matter. Very, very short snippet. It's really a story about Schindler and Amon in a certain sense. It's not really about what's happening to the Jews. It's almost in the background of this story, which is, I think...
They're bit players.
Yeah, they are.
With the exception of Stern.
And I know Spielberg really tries to balance that by having numerous scenes where you have individuals shot in close-up saying their names. And there's something about, remembering the one that have been killed and murdered by saying their name. And so he tries to do that as like two relatively long scenes when this is happening. When the context in the film is when they have to get papers and sign. But I think it's very conscious of his part. And the people that say their name have also different ethnic background, different features, so you can see the variety of people that were there. Not the cliche, but this emphasis on money, I think for me was, I don't know, could have been dealt a little bit differently, I thought.
Well, I think you nailed it when you said that it is a movie really about Oskar and Amon. It really is, and I think I nailed it when I said that the Jews they're bit players in it, with the exception of a couple. They're just background, they're extras, sadly, and I think to that end, if you can find fault with this movie, which is hard to do, but if you can find fault with this movie, that's part of it. That can be it. And there's really no historical context in regards to the Holocaust at all. It's because it is a biopic, if you will.
Although coming here, I was thinking about my own criticism. I was like, okay, well, how would I do it? And the story of the Holocaust is a story of mass killing, organized mass killing. So you have to have kind of a story arc. And if the story arc is how people are rounded up and sent to the camp and killed, then you don't really have a film. I mean, the two movies for me that are very can come close is, The Gray Zone, which has a lot of weaknesses, but The Gray Zone and Son of Saul. And both of them are inside the camp. So they have this kind of fake plot, but the whole goal is to show how the camps were working. The plot on one is this girl was in the gas chamber and didn't die, and so they try to hide her, which of course doesn't work. And the other one, Son of Saul, is one of the prisoner that are dealing with all the corpse and everything. Oh, I forgot how they called Jason.
The Sonderkommando.
Yeah, the Sonderkommando. And then same thing, he has a young boy that's dead, and he thinks it's his son, and he wants to bury it with proper... Those are almost fake plot. The whole point of the movies is to show how the working of the camps happen. It's difficult. How can you visualize the Holocaust?
Well, how can you make a movie that's not, 37 hours long?
Yes.
True.
Yes.
I mean, seriously. Starting with the Nuremberg laws, if you wanted to, and going all the way to Birkenau, it'd be a long film.
But there could have been a way to develop, for example, a Stern's role, giving him more background. We don't know anything about him.
Well, he's fictional. There was no...
Yeah, he was a composite character.
Yes, he was. But composite including a woman that made the list to participate in the making of the list. But
this is where I differ, I think, a bit from Christelle and Seth in that I do think that the film really does kind of come down to Amon and Schindler. And Yitzhak and Helen are kind of, there's the interesting juxtaposition of the relationship between Schindler and Yitzhak and Göth and Helen, and the kind of parallel relationships they have, and that itself is interesting. But I think one of the things the film does is it shows people reduced to bare survival, and you get kind of masses of people that you don't really get to know so well. Even there were a handful, like you can recognize, okay, those people I've seen before, I don't really know them that well, and it's true the characters aren't developed that well. But as masses of people, we see them really doing whatever they can do to survive. That the circumstances are just so impossible that we see them thinking constantly about money in the case of Stern and others, or the black people working the black market, or they're just thinking about what can we do just to stay alive. And I think in that the film does really give you some insight about what people who you think in 1943 in the Krakow area, what they have in terms of a chance of being liberated. It's one thing to think about living in France or the Netherlands or Belgium. You're close to the UK, you can think, well, when they land, at least we'll be close. But in 1943, in southern Poland, the Soviets are still a long way off. You can imagine for people there that they know that this is going to be a long, difficult, maybe we don't any of us live to see the end of it. And I thought the film does really did convey that about a community that is really just facing absolute darkness, and what that does to people, including victims, what they're turned into, and a lot of times you read those accounts from people like Primo Levi and others who survived the camps, and we see Plaszow as awful as it is, it's not Auschwitz or Treblinka or the like, but nonetheless he'll say that the camps turned us into terrible people. I mean, we were just thinking every day about survival, just will we make it to the next day. And I thought that side of the film was very effective, in that it communicated to us something about what a community that's really on the edge all the time, and the randomness this is where I agree with what Christelle and Seth said about the randomness of Goeth's kind of rule in the camp, which is not necessarily typical. I mean, you look at a number of SS commandants; they're not necessarily. I mean, they're obviously mass murderers, but they're different kinds of mass murderers in Goeth. They don't necessarily roam around with a rifle killing people, and that just adds to this uncertainty about the comment that Helen makes to Schindler, where she says, "There's no predictability. No matter what I do, how good I do it, I cannot expect that tomorrow doing the same thing will ensure that I'm okay." And I thought the film on that level did succeed.
Yeah, I agree with you on that for sure. Let's talk about the portrayal of the Holocaust, and you kind of touched on that just now, Jason, but does the focus in the movie on those who survived downplay the millions who did not? I'll go ahead and I'll take that one real quick, and then I'll let you go, and I'll let everybody else go too. And I don't think that it necessarily does, because it's not. It is a Holocaust story, but it's not a movie about the Holocaust. It's not a movie about Treblinka or Sobibor or any of those. It's a movie about Oskar Schindler and how he saved over 1,000 people from certain, probably, death. So while I know this movie has been criticized by people for only focusing on the 1,200 plus or minus that he saved and ignoring the 6 million that did not, no, that's not what it's about, and that's just my opinion. Anyway.
I would agree with you. I would agree. I think it is a story, as we say, it's about Schindler's and Schindler's Jews, as they are called, quotation mark. But what's weird is that it turned into the movie about the Holocaust. It started in school like that, and that's a little that's too bad. It shouldn't be the case. It should be one of many ways of talking about the Holocaust. And unfortunately, often in high schools, this is the one thing we're going to watch, and this is the one thing we're going to talk about.
But what other options do you have?
There's a lot of documentaries.
Documentaries, yeah, but
there's
movies,
there's a lot of European films, dare I say, who maybe not will appeal to young American teenagers, but I think gives you also a different perspective. It's one very, very particular, as you just mentioned, it's one very particular camp. It's not Auschwitz. It's not other camps, and it's a very unusual. It's weird to talk about the Holocaust on things that's actually very unusual and not Holocaust-like.
It's an exceptional story.
Yes, it is exceptional. And in the same way, you mentioned the Jews are in the background. So why is that a film about the Holocaust? If they're in the background, it's not really a movie about them, then. It's still very good and a good teaching tool, but it needs to be put in a framework when people are using it to teach.
I think it's an excellent teaching tool, and that it, let's be honest, I mean, kids today in high school or wherever, they're going to, respond more readily to things flashing on a screen. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. And this is the movie to get I agree and I disagree, but this is the movie to get the point of the Holocaust was mass murder. This is one story in that huge, tremendously tragic story. This is one small piece, but it does get the point across. I mean, when you're done watching this, you know what it was about.
Yeah, I think that one of the most powerful things about the film in terms of the depiction of the Holocaust, I mean, we can argue about did it supply enough context for people, which is true. It doesn't supply a lot, but I think also that would have been very difficult to do, and without changing the film radically. But the film does actually give you a kind of history without telling you it's giving you a history within. I mean, you get to see ghettoization happen, and you get to see a Jewish council, even if that could have been more on that. I think that's true. There could have been more on it, but one still does see it, and about Jews who were impressed in security within the ghetto. You get to see the role of forced labor and what that meant for Jews. It was absolutely inhuman conditions, and yet it also was a promise of survival, at least for a period of time. There is that terrifying scene of the group that's rerouted to Auschwitz, and they're taken into the showers and think that it's over, and realize that they're actually they're going to live through this. And as they're coming out, they see a group who's being escorted directly into the gas chambers, and so there's a lot in there, I think, that's embedded in the film about the history, and just a few other kind of points. Like, you get to see a lot of the bureaucratic side of the genocide there, all the paperwork, and the fact that Yitzhak, the role he plays in knowing paperwork and how that could mean life or death, knowing what to say to a Nazi official, at the right moment about, making up something about your talent as a metal worker, that may save your life. You may not know that's going to save your life now, but trust me and say what I'm going to tell you. And that, I thought, was very good. And it's interesting too, the shots of the trains that you get in there, just conveying to people that who all is involved in a genocide, and people who are, handling the logistics, and who are manning these trains and booking these trains that are taking people by the hundreds and the thousands to the camps. And you don't really, none of that is developed, but it's there. And I think if you're watching the film with an eye to that, he's really showing you. In fact, I was just rewatching it a couple of days ago. I was struck by how much I missed in previous times I watched it, and I hadn't seen it in probably 4 or 5 years, and that there were a lot of subtleties there that he was, he doesn't spend a lot of time on it. He's trying to tell the story, and it's already 3 hours or so plus. But there's a lot in there that people can, take from this. And the fact that a character like Göth is interesting, that with him, that is just reprehensible as he is at every level, his corruptibility as an SS man is what, in fact, gives Schindler an opportunity to save a lot of people. I mean, we just know about many of the other SS men at these camps, that just wouldn't have happened. I mean, not that they were above corruption, but the level of corruption that Göth went along with, they just would not have. They just would not have. And Christelle was right. There were a number of these SS men that late in the war that Himmler has prosecuted for corruption. And in fact, a couple of them executed literally days before the regime falls. And that, I thought, too, was just showing how precarious their situation was. And Amber had used the term about, how rare. I mean, it's just such a different kind of story. I wondered a lot after watching it that, in how many places could something like this have happened, in Nazi-occupied Europe.
Well, we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, and there's a lot of stuff that I know everybody wants to talk about, but we're running out of some very valuable time. And a question that I have to ask everybody, and Amber, I'm going to start with you, is did you like this movie, and would you recommend it?
I would say yes, I do like this movie. I think it is probably one of the most defining films on this history of the late 20th century. And for a couple of reasons. I think it shows, like, although we talk about how, or we have been talking about how Oskar and Amon are sort of like the primary characters, with the victims, the Jewish victims, almost as secondary characters. I think this conversation kind of leads us into the limits of film and the limits of what can be truly discussed on film and what can be really shown. In thinking about this movie in particular, there's a scene where Schindler and Stern are talking about the limits of the language that they have, and Oskar asks Stern, "Well, do we have to invent a new language just to talk about this?" And Stern's like, "Yes." And that just kind of leads back into questions that Primo Levi and Ida Fink and Eli Wiesel and other Holocaust scholars have brought up, the fact that there was nothing before the Holocaust to really embody what that meant, what this sort of mass violence against people truly could mean in a world where that had never been seen before. And so to try and embody that in film or any sort of materials like literature or music or anything like that, is there are limits to what we can really imagine with our minds. And I think this film kind of gets at that in a way that some other films on other historical topics wouldn't be able to, just because of the difficultness of this history, and it's troubling. Would I recommend it? Absolutely. I don't think anyone should watch it over and over again because it's a very dark, very heavy film. But it is definitely one that needs to be seen, and seen especially by those of the upcoming generations. And I'll get off my soapbox in a moment. But there's an article out that recently that said something like 22% of high school students don't know what the Holocaust was about, or what it all means, or what it meant. And that's troubling. That's seriously a troubling moment. And so it's going to be up to folks like us, historians, teachers, and just people alike, to keep these stories at the forefront of why we teach history and why these things matters, especially in our current timeline.
Jason?
So two things about that. Did I like it? Yes. I thought it, I saw it in 1993 on the big screen when it came out. I thought it was a remarkable film then. I think I like it more than I did then. I think I see a lot more. I pick up on a lot more things in it, but with a caveat, and this is all it is. It's a caveat that I found the closing parts of the film with Schindler just a bit much. Even if they were historically accurate, I found that part of the film just as a viewer off-putting. The scene where the workers, including Yitzhak, are trying to comfort him and console him about not saving enough people. And again, that was historically accurate. I have it checked to see if that actually happened. But I just found the story itself was powerful enough, and I thought that just went into an area in terms of reconciliation that I found it off-putting. Having said that, I did really like it, and would I recommend it? I would definitely recommend it. But getting to some points I've already made, I would just tell people, if you've never seen it, it's a great film. You're going to learn a lot from it. But don't think this is the Holocaust. Don't think this tells you the whole story. It is a remarkable story, but it's certainly one story in a gigantic, huge, incredibly complicated history.
Christelle?
You guys are so eloquent. I'm not sure what to say now. Yes, I liked it a lot. Besides the little girl in the red coat and the shower scene, but I'm not going to go into that. I think it's an important film. It was very important when it came out in 93, and I think now in 2018 is almost even more important that people get a quick refresher on, an example of what the Holocaust was. It's probably one of the best Spielberg, because he stay away from some of the Hollywood zigzag, flashy thing, trope of cinema history, and I think really focus on the story. I think I really appreciate the fact that he shot it in black and white, gave it a kind of gravita, and I think without making it too much of, this is a history lesson that we have to pay attention. But and I agree with Jason. I think it's not ideal to watch it more than one. Well, it's not great fun to watch it, but a second or third viewing spaced out, I think, add a lot to one pickup. The first time you just focus on the Amon Schindler's interaction and what's going to happen. But yes, there's a lot of historical tidbits that I think altogether paint a very accurate picture of what happened in this particular camp.
Yeah, I would agree. And I like this movie. I'm not going to say I love it because I don't think anybody loves this movie, but I think it's fantastic. As I said, I think it is a very good teaching tool. And I did not know the stat that you brought up that 20 or 22%?
22%.
22% of, I'm assuming American high school students don't know what the Holocaust is. That's disgusting. I'm sorry. That's disgusting. And that's a failure in American school systems. And that's just straight up ignorance. That's whatever. But I'm not going to go there. But this is a valuable teaching tool, and especially in today's medium, in the way of getting points across to people, I think it's very, very valuable. It's a fantastic film. It really is. It has a few things in it that are not that great, but every film does. I don't think there's a film made that's perfect from beginning to end. But for what it is, this is a fantastic film. And yes, I would absolutely recommend it. I think it should be required viewing for people. I don't think you can say that about very many films, Hollywood films. But I think this is one of them. And I think this is a movie that people need to see, young and old. I mean, within reason. I mean, like, don't show this to a 7-year-old, but a 14-year-old, yeah, up until an 85-year-old, yes, you need to see this film. It's fantastic. It's absolutely, it's a masterpiece. It really is. It's a classic film.
It's interesting that Saving Private Ryan is getting a way more active, regular broadcasting, and that this one does not. I wish it was shown as often as Saving Private Ryan is shown on television. I don't know why.
No, I think that goes back to part of the discussion that we had on the previous. But so if you can you guys sum this up in one sentence? And I'm going to go back to you, Amber.
I really have been racking my brain over this one question, and I really can't sum it up because, there's so much going on in this film. Like we've been talking about, there's that immediate layer of Amon versus Oskar, the man versus man thing, with the Holocaust as a background. But then there's so many other layers up under that. We have all the background characters in Helen and Stern and the children that are around, and just the nameless background characters, the SS women, and Regina Perlman when she shows up. Like, there's all this stuff in the background that I just can't. I can't embody this film in just one sentence. I failed. I'm sorry, guys.
You didn't fail.
I think I'll share in the failure, but just to say that if you can't sum it up in one sentence, I think what I would say about it is that if you have a Hollywood film that you're going to see dealing with this kind of history, that this is the one to see. I still think that, and that's not it's not disagreeing with Christelle's point. There are other European films and documentaries that really add something, but this film shows you a remarkable story about a rescuer who certainly, from the outset, you would never consider a hero. And obviously people have problems with that. There's the big debate within Holocaust education. Should talking to people or educating people about the Holocaust, should the goal be to give them hope or to show them some positive side? And Spielberg was criticized for this. This film obviously does show a positive side, but he's showing about 1,100 or so people that were saved. And so I think in that sense, the film, if I were going to really try to sum it up, I would say that even in Nazi-occupied Europe, they were people who risked everything to save others.
Christelle?
I also cannot do that, but I think it's a very positive thing that we are unable to sum it up in one sentence. It means for me that it's a film that's so rich that it's impossible, and I think it's very positive. People should see it and not just see it and think about it, which I hope we all do. I will say, though, I don't see that as a Hollywood film. It's so un-Hollywood. It's 3 hours and 15 minutes. It's in black and white. We do have a little bit of a typical, heroes turn good something. So there's a couple of tropes where it's very unlike Hollywood. It's very restrained.
Heroes turn good, but in actuality, that's
very true. Very true.
very
Very
true.
true. So it's all the artifacts and all the plush thing of Hollywood is not there, and I think that's why it's so good. So.
Yeah, I'm going to be the fourth failure. I can't I can't sum it up in one sentence. And so what I've been doing when we do these is I pick one line in the movie that I think is to me is the best, and I think it's pretty obvious. And it comes from the Talmud, and it says, "He who saves one life saves the world entire." So with that, we're going to wrap it up, and I want to thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to hear more about the events we discussed today, listen to our mini episode next week where we will share oral histories from those who were there. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Service on Celluloid. Be sure to rate and review us on iTunes if you like what you hear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, our producer, Tessa Jager, and our sound engineer, Jeremy Burson. This has been a production of the National World War II Museum.